The night Harrison Wolfe decided to bring his building's janitor to a black tie gala in downtown Toronto, nobody in his social circle could quite believe it, least of all Harrison himself. It had started, as most unexpected things do, with a broken elevator and a very bad morning. Harrison had been standing in the lobby of Wolfe Capital's Bay Street tower, watching the repair crew argue about a circuit panel when he noticed her. She was on her knees beside the service door, mopping up a flood of dirty water that had spilled from the elevator pit. Her dark hair was pulled back under a blue cap. She was humming something, quietly, almost to herself, and she worked with the kind of focused efficiency that Harrison, who built his entire career on reading people quickly, found immediately interesting. He didn't say anything. He went upstairs. He forgot about her by noon. But then his assistant, a nervous young man named Trevor, came in to tell him that the keynote presentation for the Meridian Foundation Gala had collapsed. The consultant Harrison had hired, $3,000 a day, a man who wore pocket squares and called himself a narrative strategist, had food poisoning. The presentation file was corrupted. The backup drive was in a cab somewhere between Pearson Airport and a hotel that didn't know it was coming, and the gala was in 4 days. "Get me someone," Harrison said without looking up from his desk. "Sir, I've called. I don't care who, someone who can build a corporate social responsibility pitch from scratch in 72 hours. Someone who actually understands what the Meridian board cares about." He finally looked up. "And Trevor? Not another narrative strategist." Trevor nodded and disappeared. Harrison went back to the numbers on his screen. Outside his window, 60 floors below, the city moved on without him. He didn't think about the woman with the blue cap again, until 2 days later when he stepped off the stairwell on the lobby level. The elevator was still being repaired, and found her sitting on an overturned bucket beside the service corridor, eating a sandwich and reading a battered copy of a book with the spine so cracked he couldn't make out the title. She looked up when she heard his footsteps, and there was no nervousness in her expression. No attempt to look busy, just a calm, direct gaze that lasted exactly as long as it needed to. "You work nights too?" Harrison said. It wasn't what he'd meant to say. "Rotating shifts," she said. "Today I pulled a double." He glanced at the book. She tilted the cover toward him without being asked. Corporate Ethics and the Stakeholder Model, 3rd edition, with handwritten notes crowding every margin in small, precise script. Harrison stared at it for a moment. "That's not exactly light reading. I'm not exactly looking for light reading." He asked her name. She told him, Nadia. Nadia Fournier. She was 29. She'd been cleaning the building for 14 months. Before that, she'd been finishing a master's thesis at McGill on sustainable investment frameworks until her funding was pulled when her department was restructured and her supervisor retired. And she'd needed money quickly because her mother in Gatineau had been diagnosed with early-onset Parkinson's, and the waitlist for home care support in Quebec was, as Nadia put it, not exactly optimistic. Harrison listened. He wasn't sure why. He was a man who charged $300 a minute for his attention, and he was standing in a lobby stairwell listening to a janitor explain her academic research on environmental, social, and governance metrics. She knew what she was talking about, not in the way that people who've read about something know about it. In the way that people who've lived inside a problem know about it. She talked about the gap between what companies publicly committed to and what their supply chains actually did. She talked about what donor boards like Meridian actually wanted to hear versus what they needed to hear. She talked about a case study she'd almost published, before the funding collapsed, about a mid-sized Calgary-based energy company that had quietly reduced its water usage by 38%, simply by restructuring one internal reporting process. Harrison was quiet for a moment after she stopped talking. Then he said, "I have a gala on Friday. The keynote is a disaster. I need someone to help me rebuild it." Nadia looked at him. "I'll pay you for your time," he said. "Fairly," she said. "Define fairly," he told her. She was quiet for a moment, and he thought she might say no, and he wasn't entirely sure what he would do if she did. "All right," she said. "But I finished this shift first." She did. What followed were 3 days that Harrison would later describe privately as the most productively uncomfortable experience of his professional life. Nadia arrived at his office each evening after her shift, still in her work clothes, carrying a canvas tote bag full of notes and printouts. She drank black coffee. She did not make small talk. She read everything Harrison gave her. The Meridian Foundation's annual reports, their donor profile, their publicly stated priorities. With the same focused attention she'd given that elevator flood, and she asked questions that made Trevor go very quiet at his desk in the corner because they were questions Trevor had not thought to ask. On the second evening, Nadia pushed back on the entire approach Harrison had planned. "You're pitching the numbers," she said. "Meridian doesn't want numbers. They have their own analysts for numbers. What they want is a story, not a feel-good story, not a brochure story, a real story with a problem that they can see themselves solving. You need to give them a problem that feels urgent and a solution that feels possible. Right now, this reads like a press release." Harrison had not had someone tell him his work read like a press release since approximately 2009, and that person had been his MBA professor, and he'd been 24. "Fix it," he said. She did. By Thursday night, the presentation was something else entirely. It was tight and clear, and it had a spine to it. A single narrative thread that ran through every slide, every data point, every photograph. It started not with Wolfe Capital's charitable contributions, but with a specific community in northern Ontario, a town called Hearst, where a forestry company's exit had left 300 families without income and a watershed that was slowly dying. The pitch was not about what Wolfe Capital had done. It was about what was still possible and who needed to be in the room to make it happen, and why Friday night was the right moment to decide. Harrison read through it twice. Then he looked at Nadia, who was sitting across from him with her coffee and her notes, waiting. "This is good," he said. "I know," she said. He almost smiled. "You're not modest. I've spent a year and a half cleaning floors," she said. "I've had enough time to figure out what I'm worth." The gala was held at the Fairmont Royal York in one of the grand ballrooms on the second floor. Crystal chandeliers, string quartet, $500 plates of food that most of the guests wouldn't finish. Harrison arrived with his usual delegation: Trevor, his communications director Lynn, 2 board members whose names he could never keep straight, and Nadia, who was wearing a deep green dress she'd borrowed from her roommate and who looked, in the way that quietly confident people often look, like she had always belonged exactly where she was standing. The first person who made it clear that she did not belong was Mitchell Farrow. Mitchell was the kind of man who had been important for so long that he'd stopped noticing the effort it used to take. He was 63. He ran one of the oldest wealth management firms in English Canada, and he had the manner of someone who had decided, at some point in his 40s, that social charm was a resource best conserved for people who could return it with interest. He looked at Nadia when Harrison introduced her, looked at the small smudge of industrial cleaning solvent on the inside of her left wrist that she hadn't quite scrubbed off, and looked away. "And what do you do?" he asked her, not really asking. "I work for Harrison," Nadia said pleasantly. "In what capacity?" "Strategic consulting." Mitchell's expression didn't change exactly, but something moved behind his eyes. "Is that right?" "That's right," Nadia said. Harrison watched this exchange and said nothing. He noted that Nadia did not look to him for rescue. Through dinner, Mitchell's business partner, a sharp-edged woman named Constance Webb, made exactly 2 comments to Nadia, both directed to the space slightly above Nadia's head, as if speaking to an inconvenient piece of furniture. Several other guests at their table performed a version of the same trick. They were not rude, exactly. They were simply absent. They talked around her the way water moves around a stone. Not with force, just with the easy indifference of something that has always gone the same direction. Nadia ate her dinner. She participated when she was included and waited when she was not. She was watching everything. Harrison noticed that she was watching the Meridian Foundation board members especially closely. Specifically Charles Adebayo, the Foundation's chair, who had been quiet throughout dinner in the way that powerful people are sometimes quiet when they are thinking hard about something. "He's not happy," Nadia said quietly to Harrison between courses. "Look at how he's holding his program. He's read it 3 times. Something in the pre-event materials is bothering him." Harrison looked. Charles Adebayo was indeed turning his printed program over in his hands with the slow, deliberate movement of a man trying to work something out. "The Hearst numbers," Harrison said, realizing. "They're out of date by 2 quarters, Nadia said. "I flagged it on Wednesday, but the version that went to print was the earlier one. We need to address it before the keynote, or he'll ask about it in front of everyone, and the moment will go sideways." Harrison stood up quietly. and crossed the room to speak to Charles Adebayo. He was gone for 7 minutes. When he came back, his expression was different. He said he noticed the same discrepancy you just described, and he's been trying to decide whether to say something privately or wait. Nadia nodded. What did you tell him? I told him we had the updated figures and I'd speak to them directly in the keynote. Good, she said. Lead with Hearst, pivot to the updated watershed data in the third slide, and cut the third quarter comparison graphic entirely. It's redundant, and it slows the room down. Harrison looked at her. You want me to change the presentation 20 minutes before I deliver it? I want you to deliver the version that works, she said. 20 minutes is enough time. It was. The keynote was the best Harrison had ever given, not because of the slides. Though the slides were clean and clear and said exactly what they needed to, but because he had walked into that room knowing what the room needed, and that knowledge had come from a woman who had spent 3 days in his office after 14-hour cleaning shifts, reading everything carefully and asking the right questions. He could feel the difference. The room felt it too. Charles Adebayo was nodding before the third slide. Mitchell Farrow started paying attention around the 7th. By the time Harrison opened the floor for discussion, the conversation had already shifted in exactly the direction Nadia had predicted it would. The Meridian board was not asking whether to proceed with the partnership. They were asking how. After the formal portion of the evening ended and the room relaxed into cocktails and quiet conversation, Harrison found Charles Adebayo standing near the tall windows overlooking Front Street, his glass in one hand watching the city below. That young woman you brought, Charles said, without preamble. She caught my attention before you even got to the keynote. She was the one who noticed I was looking at the program. Harrison paused. She noticed a lot of things. Where is she now? Talking to your director of community investment programs, Harrison said. Constance Webb introduced them, actually. Constance is now trying very hard to look like that was her idea. Charles laughed. It was a short laugh, but a real one. What does she do for you exactly? Until last week, Harrison said. She cleaned my building. Charles was quiet for a moment. He looked out at the city. And before that? She had a research fellowship at McGill, Sustainable Investment Frameworks, and she ended up cleaning your building. Her mother got sick, Harrison said. She needed stable income. The academic world is not particularly good at accommodating people who need stable income. Charles turned to look at him. And what are you planning to do about that? It was a question Harrison had been thinking about since Wednesday. Since the moment Nadia had pushed back on his presentation and been right. Since the moment she'd said she'd had enough time to figure out what she was worth. I'm still working on it, he said. The evening ended at 11. Harrison's car was waiting on Front Street. He found Nadia in the lobby, her borrowed coat over her arm, waiting for the valet with the same unhurried patience she brought to everything. The director of community investment wants to talk next week, she said when he approached. She thinks my Hearst research could form the basis of a longitudinal study they've been trying to build for 2 years, I heard. She also thinks I should apply for the Meridian Foundation's research fellowship. She's right, Harrison said. Nadia looked at him sideways. You already knew about the fellowship. It was not a question. Charles mentioned it last year, Harrison said. I may have mentioned your name to him before we came tonight. Nadia was quiet. Outside, through the revolving doors, the November wind pushed dead leaves across the sidewalk in small, brief spirals. You could have told me, she said finally. There was something careful in her voice. Not anger. Something more complicated. I wasn't sure you'd come, Harrison said. If you knew there was an agenda, there's always an agenda, she said. That's not what I'm talking about. She looked at him. I'm talking about the fact that you introduced me to these people as your consultant. Knowing what I actually do in your building. Knowing how they'd look at me. I know how they looked at you, Harrison said. And I wanted to see what you did with it, he said. Because I already knew you were the smartest person who was going to be in that room, and I wanted the room to know it too. Nadia was quiet for a long moment. The valet brought her coat. She put it on. She was thinking. He could see it in the particular stillness that came over her when she was working something out. That's not a good enough reason, she said at last. Next time you ask. Next time, he said. She looked at him sharply. There's a next time, if you want there to be. The pause that followed lasted perhaps 5 seconds. Outside, a streetcar went by, its lights sweeping briefly across the hotel entrance. "I'll think about it," Nadia said, and there was, at the very edge of it, the beginning of something that was not quite a smile. She took the elevator. Harrison stood in the lobby for a moment after she was gone, looking at nothing in particular. In the weeks that followed, several things changed. Some of them were the things Harrison had arranged. A conversation with the HR director, a restructuring of Nadia's contract, a formal consulting arrangement that paid her what she was actually worth and left her shifts to someone who needed them. Some of them he had not arranged at all. Nadia applied to the Meridian Fellowship. She was offered it in January, and she turned it down, because by then Charles Adebayo had offered her something better. A staff position building out the Foundation's Community Impact Research Division, a role that had been vacant for 2 years because they hadn't been able to find someone who understood both the numbers and the human reality behind them. She accepted on a Wednesday. She texted Harrison from the Meridian offices on King Street, a single line, "Accepted. Starts February. Thank you for the elevator breakdown." He read it twice. He wrote back, "The elevator is still broken, for the record." She sent back, "Get a better maintenance contract." He laughed. He was alone in his office when he did it, and it was a real laugh, the kind that surprised him. Mitchell Farrow called him the following week to ask, in the roundabout way that Mitchell Farrow asked everything, whether Harrison could introduce him to that woman from the Gala, the one with the sharp instincts. Harrison told him that Nadia Fournier had just accepted a position at the Meridian Foundation, and he was welcome to reach out through their office like anyone else. Mitchell was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "She's the one who caught Charles looking at his program." "Yes," Harrison said. "Smart," Mitchell said. He paused. "You brought her there on purpose." "I brought her there because she built the presentation," Harrison said. "Everything else was her." Mitchell was quiet again. Then, "Fair enough." Harrison saw Nadia twice in December, once at a Meridian event where they stood near the same table and talked for an hour about the Hearst research and whether it could be expanded to 2 other Northern Ontario communities, and once at a coffee shop on Adelaide Street where he had been getting his usual order and she had been waiting for hers, and neither of them had planned it at all. That second time she had her notebook open on the counter and was writing something quickly, and she didn't look up when he stood beside her. But she said, without pausing, "I'm going to Hearst in March. Site visit. The director wants updated watershed samples." "I know," he said. "I'm funding part of it." She looked up then. "You are?" "The Wolfe Capital Sustainability Portfolio," he said. "The Hearst project qualified." She studied him for a moment. "Did you know about that when you built the presentation?" "I knew it was possible," he said. "I didn't know it would happen." Nadia held his gaze for a moment longer than was strictly necessary. Then she went back to her notebook. "Fine," she said. "Then I'll see you in Hearst." Harrison ordered his coffee. He stood waiting for it at the end of the counter. Outside on Adelaide, the December light was already going at 3 in the afternoon, the way it does in Ontario, in winter, early and without ceremony. He thought about the morning he'd seen her on her knees in the lobby, mopping up a flood with the focused, unhurried attention of someone who understood that the work in front of you is always worth doing well. He'd thought in that moment that it was a particular kind of discipline. He understood now that it was something more than that. It was a kind of dignity that didn't require an audience, the kind that is there whether or not anyone is looking. He had built a career on knowing the value of things before other people noticed them. He had been slower this time than he liked to admit. Nadia left the coffee shop first. She tucked her notebook into her bag and pulled on her coat and said, "Don't be late to Hearst," in the tone of someone who fully expected that he would be on time, who had already decided that he was someone who could be counted on to do the right thing when it mattered, even if he sometimes needed a push to get there. Harrison picked up his coffee. He thought about that. He decided she was probably right.